Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 6, a podcast uh, of principle based politics called Extremely Non Extreme. My guests today on episode 6 of the Extremely Non Extreme podcast are Jonah Heuer and Luke Sandstrom, a Republican in Mr. Heuer, a Democrat in Mr. Sandstrom. Both are young, and perhaps, as their names would indicate, Jonah and Luke, both men are active in their Christian faith. Luke Stanstrom is an engineer who works in a municipal water department. Jonah Heuer is a construction worker and writer. Now, one format of this podcast features two guests, one with opinions and preferences on the left and one on the right, and me moderating literally from the center, hence my red, white, and blue shirt. If I keep doing this much longer, I'm going to have to get more Minnesota Twins shirts. Uh, I moderate from the center, and today is the second episode with that format. And we'll explore just how far apart these guests' views really are and whether they might even stand on some common ground. Now, I have referred to Jonah as a Republican and Luke as a Democrat, but I'm wondering, that's labeling you, and I wonder how you would describe or label yourself politically. Luke, starting with you, is there a word or a phrase that summarizes your political identity?
That's a great question. I actually took a lot of thought to try to think of what would label and what would be accurate. What I came up with was an inconsistent social democrat. And to me, I guess that what that means is largely w wish to maintain our system of capitalism. I think it works well, but would like to really see a lot more social safety nets and programs around for people to help kind of supplement how cutthroat capitalism can be. So, not a full-on socialist, but kind of pro-social programs. The inconsistency part comes from, and this is really tricky being labeled, is there's just a lot of things in that bucket that I do and don't agree with. So, I would say I'm pro kind of traditional concepts like universal health care, social security, public education, but other things like, wholehearted absolutism of like collective bargaining and overregulation, I'm not a fan of. And so the inconsistency of the spectrum, it can get kind of give you case by case, but that's kind of what I thought where I'm at right now. That's kind of how I would sum it up.
All right. Jonah, how about you? Are there words, phrases, causes that you identify with other than just simply the word Republican?
Yeah, this was kind of fun to think about. There's been a bit of seems like there's an identity crisis going on the right, at least for a few years, probably longer than that. Maybe Trump's part of bringing that identity crisis up to the surface. But I'd probably just put it simply and say I'm a conservative. I want to conserve my country, my state, my community, the legacy and heritage that I've inherited from my fathers. My great great grandfather was the first one to come over here. I want to preserve that and conserve that and hand it down to my kids and hopefully their kids. So I'd put it simply and just say I'm a conservative.
All right, very well. And as anyone who is watching this podcast as opposed to listening can tell, I have with me a couple of young gentlemen, and that's the topic of today's podcast, differentiating this from the other 5 episodes that have come before. I'm interested today in talking about what young voters want going forward. Not as interested in criticisms of anything that's happened up to now. A topic we'll discuss is what you two want from your political parties, and specifically what you want from your own party in 2026 and 2028. What platforms, what types of candidates, what campaign tone, and so forth. So, first, I would just like to know how much interest the two of you and your contemporaries, to the extent you know, people your age, how much interest is there in politics? I'm referring especially to the governor's race, the state legislature, races for U.S. Congress, and especially the presidency. Do y'all care? And I'll start with Jonah on this one.
And I talked to plenty of guys around my age who who have at least some interest, who care at the national level. It's easy enough to start a conversation talking about, what's Trump up to right now, what's going on in the federal government, what's in the news. It seems like there's at least a decent amount of interest at that level. I don't know too many people my age who are as interested as I am, particularly when it comes down, the further low on the level of locality that you get, the more a gap I see between myself and at least the younger folks in my circles. Even some of the older folks in my circles, I seem to be maybe a little bit more interested in some of those details than a lot of my contemporaries, at least that I am interacting with on a regular basis.
Luke, how about you? Are you deeply interested, and do you sense that your peers share that interest?
Personally, I'm not super interested, kind of what I would say with politics outside of 10 miles from my house. Used to be quite a bit more. I think with the first Trump presidency, a lot of people kind of got disenfranchised and also just kind of realized how much as scary as your political appointment can be as president, there's a lot more you can actually do and a lot more affects you on the local level. So I saw a lot of people get a lot more involved in public committees, commissions, running for city council, county board type of things after that. So I've actually seen kind of the local level and involvement kind of step up a little bit since then. I think also, and can talk about this, it's a through line for the Democratic Party. I think there's a lot of people not really excited about the established party, the old guard in some ways. And so the same candidates keep coming. I think more and more people check out because it's just more of the same. They feel like their voice is not being heard. And so I'd say in my circles, it's a lot actually more local, less so, it's the flashy headlines, what happens out in DC. But I think a lot of people do are starting to realize how much impact the local does actually in your day to day.
Interesting. I have a little story to tell about how much interest there really is in politics, and maybe it's because it's an off year election wise. But I happen to live in the district that was represented by Melissa Horton until her death uh, this summer. And I mentioned that at our National Night Out, which was just last week. We have National Night Out on our block, and there were a lot of people there. And I said, have you heard about the special election to replace Melissa Hortman? And I don't recall talking to anyone who knew Melissa Hortman was our representative and that we live in her district. So when people don't even know who their representative is, that that seems to show a level of disinterest, which was disappointing to me.
Yeah.
But it always increases in election years, and I know people are interested in at least the presidential elections. So let me ask you, Luke, how does the national government, what happens in Congress, Washington, D.C., the presidency, how does it affect your life, your family's life personally?
Yeah, I mean, this has really come from a point of privilege, but my wife and I are lucky and privileged enough that really, honestly, whoever wins doesn't really change our lives too much. And, there's obviously a tone and discussion, but when it comes from a policy point of view, we've largely been insulated, and whoever wins, my life largely isn't affected by it. I would say that can cause some apathy, but we try to really stay engaged because there are our neighbors. There is the poorest among us that are affected, so we try to not check out by that. But personally speaking, I'm largely insulated from it, and again, that's a point of privilege that my wife and I do experience.
Okay. Jonah, uh, what's your uh, what's your impact from what the national government does?
Well, I mean, especially since the national government's so big and far-reaching these days, it seems like the national government really does affect a lot of areas of life. I mean, I believe what Luke is saying about how and I mean, even in my life, a lot of ways it seems kind of insulated, but it feels like the long-term effects are just kind of piling up and piling up from the national government's decisions over years and decades. And I'd say with some of the issues that were most on people's minds in the most recent election, for instance, you know, one way that the federal government affects my life, affects all of our lives over the course of decades is, you know, I have to press one for English on a lot of my phone calls. That's because of the decisions of the federal United States government over the years. The federal government under Joe Biden is the government, not my states or my counties necessarily, but the federal government that let in 10 million or so foreign criminals into our country and just didn't say boo about it. So when you hear stories about some of the more famous ones like Lake and Riley's case, or plenty of cases that don't nobody ever learns their names, the national government affects a lot of people's life by letting in the people who do these heinous crimes, and even at the lower level, it just seems like these national issues really affect a lot of people in their daily lives, in their pocketbook, in their jobs, in their local communities, and in the very culture of our whole country. And that's just, the one issue that seemed like it was top of the ticket for a lot of people. I mean, I could probably go on, but that's one example where I
Well,
think the national government
immigration,
really is affecting everyone's life.
let me push back on that a little bit. I live in the same country you do. I'm probably two or three times as old as you, and I don't recall ever being a victim of crime that I can think of by any kind of a person, immigrant or not. Is that something that has affected you and your family personally? I mean, yes, we have to press one for English on phone calls sometimes, but crimes, has that impacted you, Jonah?
I have not, no one I know in my personal life, nor myself, has been the victim of a crime from an illegal alien. No.
Yeah, well, but I still see where you're coming from, and I appreciate your answer there, Luke. How do uh, you think about this question? We've talked about how the federal government impacts our lives or doesn't impact our lives in some cases, or rarely does. But so with those issues, with that situation, what kind of issues would be important for you to see covered in your party's platform? We all come from this privileged. We're privileged in one sense or another, but there still are issues that are important to me, and I imagine there are to you. What are those?
Yeah, the thing that's been coming a lot to mind to me and also has come up a lot in conversations I had with people and just also in podcasts and things I'm listening to. And also something that I've actually heard expressed on both sides. So I'm actually kind of encouraged that both parties might take the mantle on this, is just how much young people are struggling in this country. I heard a stat recently that said for the first time in our country, a 30-year-old is doing worse statistically than their parents were at 30. And that's never happened before. And so I think we have this issue where we have broken this social construct and our kids are going to pay the bill on our debt. They're going to pay the bill and they're going to hold the bag on a lot of things that we've had done that are unsustainable. I've heard tons of studies about how people over 55 feel really good about America, but under 34, it's like 1 in 5 feel good about America. And for me, that's data points that we're not leaving this for the next generation better than we found it. And I think we're just failing people. So for me, it's things that, young people are interested in, housing affordability. I have an 8-month-old child, reduction in childcare costs. We would all like to see people have more babies, but they're very expensive, and I haven't seen either party really kind of mitigate that directly or head on. And again, I think what's cool is I've actually heard people like Charlie Kirk talk about this, as well as people like Scott Galloway, people on both sides of the spectrum are seeing it. And I really think if we don't do something about it, this kind of ex American experiment we're doing is not super sustainable. And I'm worried. And so if people don't even talk about that or broach it or act like it's not that big of a deal, like that's a real big deal breaker for me. And I would need to see kind of how are we helping the next generation out as a huge platform piece for anyone I would vote for going forward.
Jonah, what you've mentioned illegal immigration. What other issues are important to see you covered in your party, the Republican Party's platform?
Yeah, that's a big one, and I do agree a lot with Luke's same concern about the economics of it all, especially for the up and coming generations. And I've got two little kids, so I sympathize with you there, Luke. It's there's a lot of trickiness to paying for all the needs for my young family. One thing I particularly would like to see when it comes to the economic part of the Republican Party's platform, I, a lot of the more moderate types, the more centrist types in the Republican Party nationally here in Minnesota, it seems like are really eager to talk about economics and business and all these things, taxation, regulation. What I specifically on that issue would love to see coming from Republicans is specifically talking about how economically, what their economic policy has to do with making it so that a young family can, kind of like Luke said, buy a house, get a good job, and really particularly a young man being able to support a family on his own income. I would love to see a plan. Obviously, that's not going to work out for everybody like a snap of a finger, but I would love to see a Republican platform that has it as a stated goal to make it so that more and more and more young families in the coming years and decades can be supported on a single income, just like, our fathers were and our grandfathers, so that as many families as want to, mom can stay home with the kids and raise the little munchkins. Dad can go out to the factory, the office, or whatever it is, and bring home the bacon, and then everything can just be so much simpler. Luke talked about childcare costs. That wasn't a concern for a lot of people because childcare was in home. So I would love to see a Republican Party that's specifically aiming at making that lifestyle that is not a distant memory, realistic again for my generation and the coming generations.
So, what kind of policy strengths do you look for, Jonah, in a candidate when you're evaluating Republican candidates? You're looking for someone who's really strong on economic issues, really concerned about families, really concerned about illegal immigration. What kind of policy strengths are you looking for in a candidate?
I think the most important thing for me is not only having the right 10-point, plan, the right checklist of we're going to do this about immigration, we're going to do this about economics, we're going to do this about abortion or whatever the main issues are that I'm concerned about. I particularly want to see candidates who are speaking realistically on the right side of the aisle. It seems like there's a lot, every Republican candidate on all from the most left side of the Republican Party to the most right side of the Republican Party. They're talking about getting back to the Constitution. We're just going to go back to the vision of the founding fathers. But nobody wants to talk about how you're going to do that in the system as it exists today, which is not the system that the founding fathers gave us. So I want a Republican candidate and a Republican platform that's willing to, kind of like Donald Trump does in a lot of things, not perfectly, but in a lot of ways, this is the actual power that's available to me in this position. If I get voted in, here's how I'm going to use that to make things better for you on this, that, and the other issue. I'm not going to cast this fantasy about, and pretending that we're all back in, 1790. I'm going to operate the government like it's the government in 2025 to whether it's rolling back the bureaucracy, that first you have to acknowledge that these bureaucracies exist. You have to acknowledge that a lot of the power of the federal government has been shifted from the legislature to the executive. You have to acknowledge that this dramatically different balance of power exists, and then say either I'm going to change that, and here's the specific things I'm going to do to change that, or I'm going to use those tools that have been created by generations before us, and I'm not going to apologize about it. I'm going to use the system as it exists. So I think, especially in his second term so far, Trump's doing a good job of showing kind of what that looks like. So it's not just about having the right policy proposal. It's about someone who actually is willing to say, I'm going to actually do what's available to me to get that done.
Luke, similar question to you. What kinds of policy strengths are you looking for? And then I'll broaden the question to what other factors. We've talked about issues already in policy a little bit, and but Jonah brought up Donald Trump, who I think has a character, style, tone that is different from his predecessors in the White House. So, what kinds of issues, character, style, tone are you looking for in a candidate from your party?
Yeah, I mean, I think what has been lost is empathy. I think, a lot of candidates that really stick out. I think about, regardless of what you think about Mandani out in New York City right now, I think he's a very compelling person. And I think people that can tell a narrative that people actually connect with, not just like Jonah said, promise the things that sound good in your election, but you actually don't have the means or the ability to even deliver on. I think that's a huge thing. And also, it's very tribalistic right now. It might be a little bit, romanticized to think we can cross the aisle on things, but I'm actually interested when I hear about things that do cross the aisle. I remember the one stuck out to me was there was a discussion about no-knock warrants, and you had libertarians and far left like on board because that was common ground for them. And I think those things do exist. We just sometimes either get whipped by the party or we just think that, well, you're the opposite, so I'm going to fight everything you do, and that's just unnecessary. Largely speaking, my critique of the Democrats is I think we oftentimes want to be perceived as right, and we forego or give up effectiveness in that. I think about the situation of, there's a discussion about raising minimum wage. They wanted to go at $20 an hour. Some Republicans, Mitt Romney, were willing to talk about 12, and they just left the table because they thought it was 20 or nothing. And it's like, okay, well, then it's back to where it started. So what was the point of you grandstanding? You didn't actually get anything done because you'd rather be right than effective. And I think that can explain a lot of what the Democrats do, and they get cut and they get stuck in that. Um, other thing I've been really encouraged is like, we talk a lot about media and fake media and this and that, but really seeing like the power of podcasts and going directly to people in last election was really, really powerful and really cool for people to sit down. I listened to JD Vance on Rogan for 3 hours, and I got really in depth with a lot of these people. And the fact that like the Democrats didn't prioritize that, one, was a mistake, and two, I think reinforced the whole kind of elitist vibe. The idea that I can't even have you in a 3-hour conversation because I'm afraid of what you might say. So you see people like Pete Buttigieg going on all these podcasts and stuff and just sitting down. That just makes people more approachable. I think people are in general just, they're sick with Washington. They don't understand how Republicans and Democrats can go to DC, make 175 grand a year, come out millionaires, and they just think it's all corrupt. And so I think if you can make yourself more approachable and more human, you will really get a lot of more people on board and kind of understand your message and come through with that.
Very good. Jonah, do you listen to podcasts too for political information?
Yeah, I listen to a handful of podcasts, some stuff from the Daily Wire, Orrin McIntyre on the Blaze, some of these guys. I listened to that same the JD Vance and Trump interviews on Rogan that I thought were really interesting. And with the style and tone question, I think style matters, tone, rhetoric matters. I wrote a whole essay recently about wanting Republican candidates in Minnesota to figure out a way to work within our state's kind of unique Minnesota nice political culture rhetorically. Because I see some of these guys who it seems to me are trying to, their idea of appealing to the middle in Minnesota is adopting leftist policies, just a little bit toned down. Where what I think would be great is a stout conservative platform that's pitched in a way that's just made to be appealing to some people who are a little bit more in the center. And the great thing about that is you don't have to lie because I think conservative policies are actually good for everybody. And I again, with JD Vance, I cited the example of the vice president debate between JD Vance and Tim Walz. And I think that was an excellent example of a very strong conservative candidate in JD Vance who really did an excellent job of combating the progressive policies and platform and rhetoric of Tim Walz, doing so with a smile on his face, with a cheerful tone of voice, with very polite expression. You know, and I think that would be a very winning pitch, particularly in Minnesota elections. Maybe that's a little bit different nationwide. I mean, obviously Trump won, and Trump is not Minnesota nice.
He
But
didn't
so
win
that style,
Minnesota either,
he did
but
not win Minnesota.
yeah,
He got close in 2016, but no, he did not win Minnesota.
right.
Um, but in terms of character, I do want virtuous men. I want virtuous men in office. And I know you have your qualms, Quentin, with Trump in terms of virtue and character. I also have qualms with him in virtue and character, especially when you go further back in his past. But one thing that I think is particularly important when it comes to talking about the character of our representatives, whether that's in the legislature, executive, whatever, locally, nationally, there are a lot of, you mentioned we're all Christians here. We all go to church. We all love, well, we all love Jesus Christ. I think there are some sections in the church in America who will criticize people, Christians, particularly evangelicals, who support Donald Trump because he has all this nasty stuff in his character and his rhetoric, especially in his past. But then they'll look at a Christian who is enthusiastic or interested about getting involved in government or politics, and they'll criticize that person for, they'll say that that person's exchanging the kingdom of heaven for the kingdom of God. But I think if we want virtuous leaders, we ought to be encouraging, particularly, as we're members of the church, we ought to be encouraging, people in the church to be taking their Christian values and their Christian beliefs about the world and about how to love their neighbor and glorify God and take that into the public square. So that's what I would love to see, is not just good rhetoric and a good tone, but real virtue.
Very good. I want to come back to you, Jonah, on the question of Donald Trump, and then Luke, I'll go to you second on this question. Donald Trump himself has been a major political issue, if you will, in politics for the last 10 years. For example, when I ran for Congress last year, people wanted to know, do you support Trump? Are you a MAGA Republican? Are you America First? They would ask me. And this was very important to many voters, and whether they would support me or not for the Republican nomination. Jonah, as a Republican, will you be trying to find out answers to those questions when you're looking at the candidates for 2026 and they're already starting to come to the fore, and 2028? Will you be wondering how they stand on the issue that is Donald Trump? Whether they believe in Trump, whether they follow Trump, whether they'll be like Trump. Is that something you're interested in?
Yeah, that'll be something I look for, mainly because I think it's a somebody's view on Trump, I think, is a good signal of whether or not this is somebody who's interested in continuing some of the necessary changes that I think Donald Trump brought to the political dynamic in our country, or if they want to go back to the 90s. If they just, everything was floating and doing good in the 80s and 90s, everything was great. Why do we have to talk about any of the problems that Donald Trump pointed out? So I'll be interested what candidate's position is on Donald Trump, because I want to know if they're actually interested in moving forward in some of the changes that Trump has brought, or if they want to just wind the clock back a few years and call it good.
So, Luke, are you 180 degrees as opposed to that, or do you agree to some extent that one, you want to know a candidate's approach to Trumpism, and if so, do you want to know because then you'll be opposed to the person if they like Trump, or does it not matter to you?
I don't think on face value it matters to me. I think our politics miss a lot of nuance, and I'd have a lot of conversations before I would just write somebody off. I personally don't think a candidate needs to be too worried about Donald Trump as a person or himself. Mega ideas, I think that can be a bigger discussion or kind of a longer term thing than Trump. I think he's an enigma, and frankly, I think Trump is one of a kind. And I say that because when other Republicans try to be Trumpy, I think they can't pull it off, and they come off kind of as jerks. So I don't think Trump can be copied, and I think he's an enigma. And I think discussions I've had with my conservative friends, I think the Republican Party is actually preparing right now for life after Trump, whether it's a JD Vance or whatever, which I think will further probably Trump's ideas in some ways, but just package like Jonah said in a kind of a Midwestern, understandable, approachable, like a JD Vance or something like that. My concern would be is if we spend so much time, and this is again back to I think people's biggest criticism of politics, is just the power pendulum. And so we have all Republicans, and then 2 years later they lose in the midterms. Democrats come in, they win the House, but then they spend 2 years just on doing everything. And one, we don't ever get to see if tariffs work out because we ended them soon. And two, we just wasted a bunch of time and everybody lost. And so I would want to see the nuance of like, I don't personally like Trump, but there are policies he has enacted that I think were smart or were new or we'll have to find out on. I think his approach to NATO, even though he's super blunt, I think was necessary in some ways. His approach to China, I don't like his language. I think it's unnecessary and cruel, but I understand where he's coming from. Frankly, his kind of approach to abortion across the nation, I think is probably the way we should go. Similar to what JD Vance said on Rogan's podcast, I think we're going to end up like Europe with different rules about feasibility or of viability, and then on from there. And then like he's making strides in like things like nuclear that were never going anywhere beforehand. So if someone comes in and just says, "Hey, I'm out because he's Trump," I've in some ways kind of lost respect for you because I do think we need more nuance in it. And I would want to see someone go through and say, these were great, let's carry these on. These were bad, let's get rid of them. And if the nuance is lacking, I think we just repeat the sins of the past over and over again, and we waste time, and people continue to lose faith that anything can actually happen in U.S. politics.
So we've talked about this a little bit, Luke, the issue of your satisfaction with your own party. A lot is being written nowadays by people like me, who just had a two-part series on the Democratic Party and how it needs to change going forward. And a lot of Democrats agree that they're unhappy with the way their party is. And I sense you share some of that unhappiness. Is there a person or a philosophy that you think, if it was adopted more, it would help your party be more successful in future elections?
I mean, at the end of the day, I think with anything, honesty is key, and honesty is the best policy. And so I think you're seeing candidates or people rise to the top, and right now there is no leader in the Democratic Party, so it's a kind of interesting leaderless time to be in. I think the people gaining steam are the people that are seen as not establishment. That's been a huge critique of the Democrats. So that's why I think someone who, is popular right now, like a Gavin Newsom, I don't think he's going to last because I just think he's too old school, too establishment Democrat for people. Pete Buttigieg is one that I think really connects with people because again, empathy, goes on these podcasts, has these honest conversations with people. Also people that like admit when they're wrong. Back to the honesty piece. I mean, let's face it, the Democratic Party gaslit people about the border, about debt, about Joe Biden being 100%. Like, if you just act like that didn't happen, then it's further reinforcing the fact that you know better than people do and the voters do. And in a sense, people know that and you lose their trust. There's other things like I was interested to see where Doge went. I think what they did was unnecessary in a number of sense, but I remember seeing the Democrats kind of have a response to it, and they would say like, "Hey, we're on board with waste, fraud, and abuse. We just, want to do it through Congress or whatever like that." And it's like, well, if you don't talk about something until your opponent does it and does it different or does it stranger or whatever, then like I don't really believe you. Like if you wanted to change things, you would have. The fact is you had the power and you didn't, so you can't tell me, yo, we all actually are on board with, reducing government spending. We just want to do it a different way. Well, if you could have, you would have done it. And so I think you come off as kind of just tone deaf when those types of news conferences happen. And I think we just also people that change their frame of thinking, this cycle, and this is kind of the establishment piece of like, yeah, you can get something like the infrastructure bill passed, which is great. I'm in infrastructure. The money's awesome. That's sweet. But if it's going to take me 4 years of permits and regulation to get it, then it actually didn't happen. So you don't get credit for passing a $1 trillion bill if it added to the deficit, and I'm never actually going to see it for a while because there's so much red tape. In the same sense, then you have fires in California, and Gavin Newsom says we're waiving all the red tape so we can build houses again, when we've been saying we need to build houses forever. So they need to change their thinking. They need to be more approachable. They need to understand that you can't just throw money at the problem. Uh, a huge issue with affordable housing or housing in general is red tape. And if they don't talk about this, again, they're missing it. So I'm going back to where I started. It's like it's the generational thing. How are we going to help the second or the next generation achieve the American dream? And if they can't articulate it in an elevator pitch, and it's just the same old talking points over and over again, I think those people are going to get passed up.
Jonah, I this week in my blog had an article about part one on the Republican Party and can it stay ahead? As I see it, the Republican Party is winning the battle of Washington, D.C. right now. And the question is, can it continue winning? And what is it going to do with its strength? And part two will be about who can lead the party in the future. But I'm interested in your thoughts about your Republican Party, and is it meeting your expectations with what your party has done with its hold on the presidency and both houses of Congress?
I'd say it's meeting my expectations in a lot of ways, in the sense that I fully expected a lot of people in the Republican Party to try and gum up the works for Trump's agenda, which is happening with some defectors in the House and defectors in the Senate. You know, you had to have a tie-breaking vote to get some of Trump's cabinet picks in. You know, J.D. Vance had to come in and break the tie because a bunch of senators didn't like his picks. But I also expected that Trump and his executive team would be able to plow through some of his agenda. And we've seen some of that with like the big, beautiful bill with a whole bunch of ICE funding, with certain other things that he's managed to make some progress on. So I expected there to be infighting. I've gotten infighting. I expected Trump to, you know, like Luke mentioned earlier, he's kind of a one of a kind guy. I expected him to be able to pull off some one of a kind stuff, and we've gotten some of that so far. So I hope I hope for more of the latter and less of the former, I guess, in the rest of his term. We'll see what happens.
You mentioned ICE funding through the big beautiful bill. I read that the budget now for ICE, or for at least immigration enforcement in the United States, is now larger than the entire national defense budget of most countries. So we'll see if, now that illegal immigration has basically stopped in the United States, according to Trump himself, we'll see if all of that ICE enforcement money remains necessary. But I wanted to ask you both, and I'll start with Jonah on this one. Should 2026 and 2028 be change elections? Neither of you are old enough to remember too many past presidential elections, but the Obama election in 2008 was, in my view, the biggest change election of all time. And if you go back further than that, Bill Clinton portrayed himself as a new Democrat, and he was going to break ways with his own party's past. And then there have been Republican examples of change elections. I think Ronald Reagan probably viewed his election as a change election. Uh, I'm wondering whether you are looking for your party to make any great changes, Jonah, or should your next candidates uh, say that they will be continuations of what Donald Trump has been doing?
Yeah, the only change I particularly want to see from my party is an acceleration of the change that Trump already began. I think we had the change election that we needed. I think that was 2016. And yeah, throw a big asterisk over this. Like you said, I'm young. I haven't experienced a lot of elections, but from my limited perspective, it seems to me that we had a change election in 2016. Donald Trump brought a big change to the political scene in my country, and I want to see that continued and, if anything, accelerated. You know, just like you mentioned with the ICE funding, and okay, all the illegal immigration has dramatically slowed down or been eliminated. It's like, well, that's great, but that doesn't mean the problem is over. You still have tens of millions of illegal foreigners here. So I want to see my government, my party, dedicated to accelerating the solution to those problems over the next years.
Luke, change. Do you want to see the Democrats that run in 2026 and 2028 promote that they will change the way America is? And if so, how?
I mean, I think it has to be a change election. If you put the same candidates up there, you're going to keep losing. I mean, I think that's what history has shown us the last number of years. So yeah, the playbook has to change. They need to focus more on the 80% issues, not the 20% issues that most people are concerned about. You know, another thing that I am encouraged by with Donald Trump as a non-traditional candidate. I would love to see younger, more representative of actual the demographics that we see. Non-traditional, no offense to you, Quentin, but non-lawyer candidate for once in a while. last time I checked, half of the Senate are lawyers and half of America are not lawyers. So I think there's some representation issues there. And so, I'm encouraged by just people leaving their business or leaving their work or trying something new, that this isn't a job, this isn't a political career necessarily. They just want to try something and they want to bring new ideas. And I think that would be fresh and would be, welcome. And if they don't do that, I think they're going to keep losing. The other thing I really want to see them do is just don't take things for granted. There has been, I would say, a borderline racist assumption of who's going to vote Democrat, who's not, and that did not play out in the last election. And so don't skip a state because you think it's a given. Don't skip an ethnic group because you think they're a given. Go talk with people, see what's going on with them. Go to every state, talk to every group of people. Don't take people for granted. Have those empathetic conversations with people. And I think you'll see a change. If the same candidates keep coming up, I think they'll just keep losing consistently.
This has been very, very good. I am so encouraged about the future of our country and the political debate in this country. If you were the only two people that represented the future of this country, I would be very, very optimistic. And I want to thank you, Luke Sandstrom and Jonah Heuer, for being guests on the Extremely Non-Extreme podcast. You are both very articulate and rational, and I that's what I'm looking for in guests. So thank you very much. To receive all of you who are listening or watching future episodes of my principle-based politics blog and this podcast, you can subscribe at principlebasedpolitics.org, and you'll receive by email notices of any new podcast episodes. Next week on the episode 7, I have something very special in mind that will be different from any of the first 6 episodes. So I'll leave you hanging on that. And I thank you again, Luke and Jonah, for your efforts here tonight. And you represented your generation well. Thank you.
It's an opportunity.